My name is Sam, and for the last 12 years, I've worked as a lineman for a rural utility cooperative in the Pacific Northwest. It's a job that takes you to the kinds of places most people only see on postcards. Deep woods, rolling hills, and forgotten valleys where the power lines cut a lonely path through miles of untamed wilderness. My partner, Dale, had been at it even longer. He was a lifer, a man who seemed more at home 100 feet up a pole in the middle of a forest than he did in his own living room. It was from Dale that I first heard the rule, a piece of local superstition that the old-timers in the area treated with the same seriousness as a down live wire. He told me on my first day, his voice low and gravelly as we loaded the truck under a sky the color of slate. "Kid," he'd said, not even looking at me, just checking the tension on a coil of rope. "Out here you hear a lot of things. Wind in the pines, animals, branches cracking. But if you ever hear something that sounds like someone you know, your wife, your brother, me, calling for you from deep in the trees, you don't answer. You don't go looking. You get in the truck and you leave. Never follow a voice that sounds like someone you know." I probably chuckle a little then, thinking it was some kind of rookie hazing. But Dale wasn't smiling. His face was set like stone, and he just gave me a long, hard look that told me he was dead serious. In the years that followed, I came to understand that every remote corner of the world has its own strange little superstitions, its own set of unwritten rules born from generations of living alongside the vast, quiet unknown. Our work territory covered a massive expanse of dense, old-growth forest, a place where the trees grew so thick they blotted out the sun, and the silence was so profound it felt like a physical weight. You could work all day, and the only sounds you'd hear would be your own breathing, the creak of your harness, and the distant caw of a raven. It was an isolating job, but I loved it. I loved the peace, the challenge, and the feeling of being a small but necessary part of something that kept the world running. Our days were usually routine. We'd get a call about an outage, usually from a tree fall or a lightning strike, and head out in our bucket truck, a beast of machine that could handle the rugged logging roads that snaked through the mountains. We'd spend the day splicing cable, replacing insulators, and clearing debris, often working from dawn until dusk. It was hard, physical work, but satisfying. Dale and I had a rhythm, a comfortable silence, punctuated by the shorthand of two people who have worked together for years. We knew each other's moves, anticipated each other's needs. He was steady, unflappable, a rock in the often precarious situations we found ourselves in. He taught me how to read the woods, how to spot a widowmaker, a dead, hanging branch before it fell, how to tell by the sound of the wind if a storm was rolling in. But there was always something about those woods that kept you on edge. It wasn't just the isolation or the awareness of being miles from the nearest hint of civilization. It was a feeling, a sense that you were a guest in a place that was ancient and indifferent to your existence. Sometimes, when I was up in the bucket, surrounded by a sea of green, I'd get the distinct feeling of being watched. I'd scan the forest floor, the dense undergrowth, the tangled canopy of fir and cedar, and see nothing. Not a deer, not a bear, not even a squirrel. Just the trees, standing silent and still, like colossal sentinels guarding secrets I couldn't begin to comprehend. I mentioned it to Dale once, and he just grunted, his eyes scanning the same woods. "They've been here a long time," he'd said. "They'll be here long after we're gone." The call that changed everything came in late October. An early, unseasonably strong windstorm had torn through the region, and a whole section of the grid was down in the Cascade foothills, affecting a few dozen remote homesteads and a small logging outpost. The outage was traced to a spur line that ran deep into the national forest, a notoriously difficult area to access. It was a 2-hour drive from our depot just to get to the turnoff, and from there, it was another hour of crawling along a muddy, rutted Forest Service road that was little more than a memory. We set out before dawn, the sky still bruised with the colors of a fading night. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the damp, loamy smell of pine needles and wet earth. The forecast called for a brief window of clear weather before another, more severe system was expected to move in, bringing heavy snow to the higher elevations. We knew we were on a clock. My wife, Sarah, had made me promise to be careful. She always worried when I took jobs this far out. She had a sixth sense for things, an intuition that I'd learned to respect. Before I left, she'd stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her brow furrowed with a familiar line of concern. "Just this one, Sam," she'd said. "It feels different." I'd kissed her and told her it was just another line, just another tree. But as Dale and I drove deeper into the mountains, leaving the last vestiges of cell service and civilization behind, her words echoed in my mind. The forest closed in around us, the trees towering over the narrow road, their branches interlacing overhead to form a dense, green tunnel. The light grew dim, and the world outside the truck's cab seemed to shrink until it was just us, the rumbling engine, and the endless, silent woods. We found the break just before noon. A massive Douglas fir, easily 200 feet tall, had been uprooted by the wind and had fallen directly across the lines. It was a clean break, but the sheer size of the tree made it a formidable obstacle. It hadn't just snapped the cable. It had taken the entire pole with it, shattering the crossarm and leaving a tangled mess of wire and splintered wood. "Well," Dale said, chewing on an unlit cigar, his usual tell for when he was assessing a complicated problem. "She's a big one. This isn't going to be a quick fix." He was right. It would take us the rest of the day, at least. We'd have to clear the tree, dig a new hole, set a new pole, and then restring the 3 phases of cable. It was a monumental task for just 2 men, but it was what we did. We parked the truck, got out our gear, and set to work, the silence of the forest broken only by the roar of our chainsaws and the rhythmic clang of our tools. The air was still, unnervingly so. The wind had died completely, and not a single needle stirred in the canopy above. It was a silence that felt heavy, expectant, as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. We worked hard for the next few hours, falling into the familiar cadence of our labor. Dale was a master with the chainsaw, and he made quick work of sectioning the massive trunk of the fallen fir. I followed behind him, hauling the smaller branches and debris off the line's path, clearing a space for us to work. By mid-afternoon, we had most of the tree cleared and were starting the back-breaking process of digging a new hole for the replacement pole we brought with us on the truck's trailer. It was during a short break, as I stood catching my breath and drinking from my water bottle, that the first strange thing happened. I heard a sound. It was faint, almost at the edge of hearing, but it was distinct. It was the sound of metal on rock. Specifically, it sounded exactly like the sharp, metallic clink of a lineman's wrench, the kind I had on my own tool belt, being dropped onto a boulder. I froze, listening. The sound had come from deeper in the woods, maybe 50 or 60 yards off to my left, where the undergrowth was particularly thick with ferns and salal bushes. I glanced over at Dale. He was sitting on a log, sharpening the chain on his saw, seemingly oblivious. He hadn't reacted at all. "You hear that?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Dale stopped his filing and looked up, his head tilted. We both listened, letting the silence stretch out. The only sound was the faint drip of water from the moss-laden branches above us. "Hear what?" he finally said, his gaze sweeping the trees. "Sounded like someone dropped a wrench," I explained, pointing in the direction of the sound. "Right over there." Dale stared into the dense woods for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I could see the skepticism in his eyes. There was no one else out here. We hadn't seen another vehicle, another person, since we'd left the main highway hours ago. We were utterly alone. "Probably a rock fall," he said, turning back to his saw. "Or a woodpecker. They could sound like all sorts of things." I knew he was right. The woods played tricks on you. Sounds could carry in strange ways, and animals could mimic the most unlikely of noises. A falling rock, a bird, even the popping of a tree's core as it settled. There were 100 rational explanations. I tried to dismiss it, to force myself to accept the simple logic of it. but I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound had been too specific, too manufactured. It hadn't been a random clatter. It had been a single, clear, metallic note that was as familiar to me as the sound of my own name. I walked a few steps toward the edge of the clearing, peering into the shadows under the trees. The forest floor was a chaotic tangle of fallen logs, mossy rocks, and thick brush. There was no sign of anything, no path, no broken branches to indicate someone had been there. It was just the impenetrable wall of the wilderness. Probably nothing, I said, more to convince myself than Dale. I went back to my work, trying to focus on the rhythm of the shovel biting into the rocky soil. But my senses were on high alert now. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. The feeling of being watched had returned, stronger than ever before. I kept glancing up from my digging, scanning the silent, watching trees that surrounded our small island of activity. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, and the light filtering through the canopy took on a golden, hazy quality. Long, distorted shadows began to stretch across the forest floor, and the temperature started to drop. A cold, damp feeling was seeping out of the earth. We still had hours of work ahead of us, and the thought of being out here after dark filled me with a primal unease that had nothing to do with the usual dangers of our job. Dale seemed to notice my distraction. "You're jumpy as a squirrel today," he remarked, not unkindly. "Something on your mind?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy. "I don't know," I admitted. "This place just feels off." He stopped what he was doing and looked around, really looked, his eyes narrowed in a way I'd seen him do when he was diagnosing a complex electrical problem. He was taking me seriously. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "It's quiet," he said. "Too quiet. Haven't seen a single chipmunk all day. Haven't heard a single bird since we got here." He was right. I hadn't consciously registered it, but the usual background chatter of the forest was completely absent. There were no bird song, no chittering of squirrels, no rustling of small animals in the undergrowth. The silence was absolute, a dead, empty void that seemed to swallow every sound we made. It felt unnatural, like the hell breath before a storm. The sound I had heard, the metallic clink, now seemed even more sinister in the context of this profound and unnerving stillness. It was an intrusion, a single, artificial note in a world that had gone completely silent, and I couldn't shake the chilling certainty that we were not alone. The next couple of hours passed in a blur of strenuous activity. We managed to set the new pole, a 40-foot length of treated cedar that we maneuvered into place with the truck's crane and a lot of sweat. The physical exertion was a welcome distraction, a way to keep my mind off the oppressive atmosphere of the woods. But as the sun sank below the ridgeline, plunging the forest into a deep, gloomy twilight, the anxiety came creeping back. The sky, visible in a small patch directly above us, was turning a bruised purple, and the clouds were thickening, moving faster than they should have been. The forecast had given us a few more hours of clear weather, but looking up at that roiling sky, I knew the forecast had been wrong. The promised storm was coming in early, and it was coming in fast. "We need to pick up the pace," Dale said, his voice tight. "I don't like the look of that sky." We worked with a new sense of urgency, the beams of our headlamps cutting sharp, dancing cones of light through the encroaching darkness. The air grew colder, and a biting wind began to whip through the treetops, making them sway and groan like ancient, weary giants. The first snowflakes began to fall, small at first, then larger and heavier, melting on our jackets and hissing against the hot engine of the truck. This was the first of the major environmental obstacles we were about to face. We were at a high enough elevation that the rain in the valleys was snow up here, and the storm was hitting with a ferocity that caught us completely by surprise. Within half an hour, the ground was covered in a thin white blanket, and the snow was coming down so thick it was like a curtain, reducing visibility to less than 50 feet. Our little work site, illuminated by the truck's floodlights, felt like the last bastion of existence in a world that was being rapidly erased by the swirling white chaos. It was in the midst of this blizzard that the second incident occurred, and this one was impossible to rationalize away. I was up in the bucket about 30 feet in the air, working on attaching the new crossarm to the top of the pole. Dale was on the ground, feeding me equipment from one of the truck's compartments. The wind was howling, and the bucket was swaying gently, a motion I was used to, but which felt more precarious in the driving snow. My headlamp beam cut through the thick flakes, illuminating the pole and the tangle of wires I was working on. I had just bolted the crossarm in place and reached down for the insulator I needed to attach next. That's when I saw it, just at the edge of my headlamp's reach, high up in the branches of a neighboring hemlock tree. Something was hanging from a limb. It was one of our tools. It was a brand new, bright yellow cable crimper, one we had just gotten from the depot last week. It was hanging perfectly balanced on a branch, at least 70 feet off the ground, in a tree we had not touched or been anywhere near. My blood ran cold. I stared at it, the snow plastering my face, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. How in the world did that get up there? It wasn't possible. Neither of us had climbed that tree. It wasn't something that could have been flung there by accident. It was placed too deliberately, balanced perfectly on the branch, as if for display. I fumbled for the radio on my belt. "Dale," I said, my voice shaky. "You there?" His voice crackled back, tinny against the wind. "Right here, Sam. What's wrong?" I couldn't take my eyes off the crimper. "Look at the big hemlock to your left. About 70 feet up. Do you see that?" There was a pause, and I could imagine him on the ground, his headlamp beam cutting through the snow, searching. "Holy hell," he breathed. Is that one of ours?" "It's the new one," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Dale, how did that get there?" He didn't answer for a long moment. The wind howled, and the snow swirled around me. I felt incredibly exposed, high up in the air, a single point of light in an ocean of darkness and white. "Get down from there," Dale said finally, his voice stripped of its usual calm. "Get down now." I didn't need to be told twice. I lowered the bucket as fast as it would go, my eyes darting nervously into the surrounding darkness, half expecting to see something moving just beyond the reach of our lights. When my feet hit the ground, I saw that Dale had a heavy-duty flashlight in his hand, its powerful beam trained on the tool in the tree. He looked pale, his face a grim mask in the harsh glare of the truck's lights. "We didn't do that," he said, stating the obvious. No animal could do that. We both knew it was true. This wasn't a random occurrence. It was a message, a deliberate, impossible act that defied all logic. The snow was coming down even harder now, accumulating rapidly on the ground and weighing down the branches of the trees. The logging road we had taken to get here would soon be impassable. A new, more urgent fear began to set in. We were trapped. "Check the radios," Dale ordered, his voice taking on a command tone I'd rarely heard. I scrambled into the cab of the truck, my hands clumsy with cold and adrenaline. I grabbed the handset for the main dispatch radio and clicked the transmit button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Do you copy?" Nothing. Just the soft, steady hiss of static. I tried again, switching through the channels. Nothing. The storm was blocking our signal completely. We were cut off. No communication, no way out until the storm broke and the snow melted. We were utterly, completely alone with whatever was out here with us. Dale joined me in the cab, slamming the door against the wind and snow. For a few minutes, we just sat there, the only sounds the rumbling of the truck's diesel engine and the relentless drumming of the snow against the windshield. The warmth of the heater felt a world away from the chilling reality outside. "I've heard stories," Dale said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. He was staring out into the swirling snow, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond our lights. "Old stories. From my granddad, who worked the logging camps up here 100 years ago." He paused, and I waited, not daring to interrupt. Stories about the woods being territorial, about things that live out here, things you don't want to see, things that mimic you, that try to draw you in. He turned to look at me, his eyes dark and serious. He always said the same thing I told you. Never follow a voice that sounds like someone you know. The old warning, the piece of local folklore I had dismissed as superstition, now felt like a lifeline, a piece of crucial, life-saving advice. Hearing Dale, the most grounded and rational man I knew, give voice to these fears sent a fresh wave of terror through me. He believed it. He believed we were in real, tangible danger from something that wasn't a bear or a cougar or anything else that belonged in these woods. A strange smell began to permeate the cab of the truck, faint at first, then stronger. It was a sharp, acrid scent like burnt wiring or ozone, but with an underlying, cloying sweetness that turned my stomach. It was coming from outside, carried on the wind. It was a smell that had no place in a forest. It was chemical, artificial, and deeply wrong. The feeling of being watched intensified, pressing in on us from all sides. It felt like 100 unseen eyes were staring at us from the impenetrable wall of snow and darkness, and the silence beneath the wind's howl was filled with a malevolent intelligence. We were no longer just linemen trying to fix a power outage. We were trespassers in a place with ancient rules we had broken, and now we were being hunted. We spent the night in the truck, the engine running to keep the heater going and the lights on, pushing back the oppressive darkness. Neither of us slept. We sat in silence, watching the snow pile up around us, our eyes scanning the perimeter of the light for any sign of movement. Every creak of a snow-laden branch, every gust of wind that shook the truck sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The strange, ozone-like smell would come and go, a faint, nauseating reminder that we weren't alone. Around what must have been 2 or 3 in the morning, the third incident happened, and it was the most terrifying yet because it was directed squarely at me. Faintly, from somewhere out in the storm, I heard a voice. It was muffled by the wind and the thick glass of the truck's window, but it was unmistakably Sarah's voice. "Sam? Sam, help me." I sat bolt upright, my heart leaping into my throat. It was her. It sounded exactly like her, the same pitch, the same inflection, the same note of panic I heard once before when she'd cut her hand badly in the kitchen. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Dale, my eyes wide. He was already looking at me, his face grim. He had heard it too. "Don't, Sam," he warned, his voice a low growl. "Remember the rule." The voice came again, closer this time, just at the edge of the woods. "Sam, I'm over here. I fell. Please help." My entire being screamed at me to go to her. It was my wife. She was out there, hurt in a blizzard. How was that possible? It made no sense, but the sound was so real, so convincing, that my hand instinctively went to the door handle. Dale's hand shot out and gripped my arm like a vice. "That is not your wife," he said, his knuckles white. "Look at me, Sam. That is not her." I stared at him, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. The voice cried out again, a desperate, pleading sob that tore my heart. But as I looked into Dale's steady, frightened eyes, the cold logic of the situation began to break through the panic. Sarah was at home, 200 miles away. There was no possible way she could be here. It was a trick, a mimicry. It was the thing in the woods, using the person I cared about most in the world as bait. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The malice of it, the cold, calculating cruelty, was beyond comprehension. "Make it stop," I whispered, my voice breaking. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the phantom voice of my wife begging for help from the darkness, a voice that was a perfect, soulless imitation. Eventually, it faded, swallowed by the howling of the wind, leaving behind a silence that was even more terrifying. By dawn, the snow had stopped. A thick, pristine blanket of white, at least 3 feet deep, covered everything. The world was silent, muffled, and eerily beautiful. But the beauty was menacing. The deep snow meant we weren't going anywhere. The truck was buried up to its axles, and the road was completely gone, erased from the landscape. Our only hope was to finish the job. If we could get the power back on, the logging outpost down the line would have a working phone. We could call for help. The alternative was to stay here and wait, a prospect neither of us could stomach. We ate a cold breakfast of granola bars and formulated a plan. We would work together, get the lines reconnected as fast as humanly possible, and then figure out a way to hike out to the outpost, which was about 5 miles further down the line. It was a desperate, risky plan, but it was better than doing nothing. As we prepared to head back out, Dale pointed toward the hemlock tree where the crimper had been. It was gone. The branch it had been resting on was bare, swaying gently in the morning breeze. There were no tracks in the fresh snow around the base of the tree. Nothing. It was as if it had never been there. The absence of the tool was somehow more disturbing than its appearance. It was another impossible act, a clear sign that whatever was out here with us was still watching, still playing its twisted games. The final strange event before the climax happened as we were stringing the last of the cables. We were using a pulley system attached to a tree to hoist the heavy line up to the crossarm. I was on the ground, pulling the rope, while Dale was up in the bucket, ready to secure it. As I was pulling, I felt the rope go slack. I looked up. The pulley, a heavy steel block, had vanished. One moment it was there, attached to the tree with a thick canvas strap, and the next it was gone. The rope fell to the ground in a useless coil. There had been no sound, no snap of the strap breaking. It had simply disappeared. We stared at the empty strap, then at each other. There was no explanation. It was the final straw. The tricks, the voices, the misplaced tools. It was all leading to something. The forest was no longer just watching. It was actively working against us, and we knew, with a certainty that chilled us to the bone, that our time was running out. The sun was already beginning its descent, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of orange and pink. The fleeting beauty of the sunset stood in stark contrast to the terror that was coiling in my stomach. We had to get the last line connected. It was our only way out, our only chance. With the pulley gone, our job became infinitely harder and more dangerous. Dale would have to pull the heavy cable up by hand, a feat of strength that would push him to his limits, while I stayed on the ground, trying to feed him as much slack as I could. The temperature was dropping fast, and the air was becoming painfully cold. My fingers were numb inside my gloves, and every breath was a sharp, icy stab in my lungs. The forest was growing darker, the shadows between the trees deepening into pools of impenetrable black. The unnerving silence had returned, a heavy, listening quiet that felt like the prelude to a final, terrible act. "Almost there, Sam," Dale called down from the bucket, his voice strained with effort. He had the end of the cable now, wrestling it into position. "Just need to connect it to the insulator, and we're good to go." My job was done for the moment. I stood by the base of the pole, my headlamp beam pointed up, watching him work. The woods were completely dark now, a solid wall of blackness just beyond the reach of the truck's floodlights. The ozone smell was back, stronger than ever, sharp and metallic. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague sensation. It was a palpable pressure, a physical weight pressing in on my skull. I spun around, sweeping my headlamp beam across the tree line. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating the snow-covered trunks of the ancient trees. Nothing. And then I saw it. For a split second, my light passed over a shape. It was standing between two massive cedars, just at the edge of the darkness. It was tall, impossibly, unnaturally tall, and thin. It was a silhouette, a stick-like figure that had to be at least 9 or 10 feet high. It was utterly black, absorbing the light from my headlamp, and it was perfectly still. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. It was not a tree, not a shadow. It had a form, a shape that was horribly, grotesquely wrong. As I kept the light trained on it, I saw another one move behind it. The movement was what broke me. It didn't walk or run. It flowed, a smooth, silent glide through the deep snow, leaving no tracks, making no sound. It moved with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and utterly horrifying. Then I saw another, and another. There were more of them, dozens of them, standing silently in the trees, their tall, slender forms just visible in the gloom. They had been there the whole time, watching us. A strangled cry escaped my lips. "Dale!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Get down. Now!" He must have heard the terror in my voice, because he didn't ask questions. I heard the clatter of a tool dropping, and the whine of the bucket's hydraulics started immediately. My eyes were still locked on the figures in the trees. They were starting to move, gliding out from between the trunks, converging on our small circle of light. They moved in unison, a silent, coordinated advance. They were not aggressive, not yet. They were just coming. A low hum began to emanate from them, a soft, vibrating thrum that I could feel in my teeth and my bones. It was the source of the ozone smell, the source of the pressure in my head. They were getting closer. The snow around them seemed to shimmer and distort, as if they were radiating a heatless energy. The bucket touched the ground with a soft thud. Dale jumped out, his face white with fear. "What is it? What did you see?" he yelled over the hum. I just pointed, my hand shaking uncontrollably. He followed my gaze, and I saw the color drain from his face. "Oh God," he whispered. The figures were at the edge of the clearing now, maybe 40 feet away. We could see them more clearly in the combined glare of our lights. They had no discernible features, no faces, no clothes, just impossibly long limbs and torsos, their forms shifting and wavering like a heat haze. There were things of shadow and geometry, things that did not belong in our world. One of them raised a long, spindly arm and pointed directly at the truck. The humming intensified, and the truck's headlights began to flicker. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died, plunging us into near total darkness. The only light left was from our headlamps, two frantic, bouncing beams in an overwhelming sea of black. Panic, pure animal panic, seized me. "The truck!" Dale screamed. "Get in the truck." We scrambled for the cab, fumbling in the dark, our feet slipping in the deep snow. The humming was all around us now, a deafening, soul-shaking drone. I risked a glance over my shoulder. They were moving faster, gliding across the snow with terrifying speed, their black forms closing in on us from all sides. I saw a flicker of movement above me and looked up. One of them was in the trees, perched on a branch directly over the truck, its long form silhouetted against the faint starlight. It unfolded itself, dropping silently toward us. I threw myself toward the passenger door, yanking it open and tumbling inside. Dale was right behind me, diving into the driver's seat. He slammed the door shut just as a long, black limb slapped against the window, the impact making the entire truck shudder. The glass didn't break, but a network of fine, spidery cracks instantly appeared. He was screaming, turning the key in the ignition again and again. The engine wouldn't turn over. It was dead. We were trapped in a metal box, surrounded by things that defied reason, things that had killed our only means of escape. Dale didn't stop. He just kept turning the key, his face a mask of desperate determination, shouting a stream of curses at the dead engine. The humming outside was a physical force, vibrating through the frame of the truck, making my vision blur. More impacts rocked the cab as the things outside began to push and shove against it, their silent, relentless pressure making the metal groan in protest. I could see their slender, wavering shapes through the windows, a crowd of living shadows pressing in on us. One of them appeared at the driver's side window, its form so close it distorted the view. It had no face, but I felt a gaze, a cold, analytical intelligence studying us. It raised a limb and touched the glass. A low, grinding sound began as the cracks in the window, started to spread, branching out from the point of contact like frost on a cold pane. The glass was about to give way. We were going to die. Then, a miracle. On what must have been the 20th try, the engine caught. It sputtered, roared, and then settled into a rough, uneven idle. Dale didn't hesitate. He slammed the truck into four-wheel drive and stomped on the accelerator. The tires spun uselessly in the deep snow for a terrifying second, and then they caught. The truck lurched forward, breaking free from the snow and the grasping limbs of the creatures. We shot forward, plowing through the snowdrift that had blocked the road. One of the figures was directly in our path. We hit it. There was no sound, no feeling of impact, but the creature dissolved as we passed through it, like a column of smoke, only to reform immediately behind us. They weren't solid. They weren't physical in a way we could understand. Dale was a man possessed, wrestling with the wheel, keeping the truck on the barely visible track of the logging road. I looked back through the rear window. They were chasing us, a whole host of them, gliding effortlessly over the snow, their tall, black forms keeping pace with the truck with a terrifying, unnatural ease. Our drive out of that forest was a nightmare. The truck skidded and slid on the snow-covered road, threatening to plunge us into the ditch a dozen times. Dale fought it, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the narrow path illuminated by our flickering headlights. The creatures stayed with us for miles, a silent, shadowy escort running alongside us in the trees. They never tried to attack the truck again, they just watched. It was an escort, a chilling reminder that they were letting us go. They could have stopped us at any time, but they chose not to. Finally, as we reached the lower elevations where the snow turned to a slushy rain, they fell back, disappearing into the darkness of the woods as silently as they had appeared. We didn't stop driving until we hit the main highway and saw the reassuring glow of streetlights. We pulled over, and for a long time we just sat there, shaking, the engine ticking in the sudden blessed silence. We never filed a proper report. What could we say? That we were attacked by tall, shadowy stickmen in the woods? They would have sent us for a psychiatric evaluation. We simply said the storm was worse than predicted, that our equipment failed, and that we had to abandon the job. They sent another crew out a few days later, after the snow had melted. They found the pole repaired. The final line was connected, the job finished. We hadn't done it. We had fled before Dale could attach that last wire. Something out there had finished our work for us. That, to me, was the most terrifying part of the whole ordeal. The tools, the voices, the chase, it was all a game to them. They weren't just monsters. They were intelligent, and their motives were utterly, terrifyingly alien. I quit my job a week later. I couldn't go back into those woods. I couldn't even look at a dense stand of trees without feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. Dale stayed on for another year, but he never took another remote job. He retired early. We don't talk about what happened. We don't have to. It's a memory that lives in both of us, a shared scar that will never fully heal. I still have nightmares. I see those tall, thin figures gliding through the trees. I hear my wife's voice calling for help from the darkness, and I feel that soul-shaking hum in my bones. I live in the city now, surrounded by concrete and steel and the constant noise of humanity. I need the noise. I can't stand the quiet anymore. Sometimes late at night, when the city sleeps, I think I can hear it, a faint hum just at the edge of hearing, and I wonder if they're still out there, watching, waiting. The experience left me with no answers, only questions that will haunt me for the rest of my life. But it did leave me with one certainty, a piece of wisdom passed down from the old-timers who knew the secrets of the deep woods. It's a warning I will carry with me to my grave, a rule that I now know is not superstition, but a fundamental law of survival in a world that is far stranger and more dangerous than we can possibly imagine. Never follow a voice that sounds like someone you know.